Hello, this is Joe Hage. I am the leader of the Medical Devices Group, and I am thrilled to welcome you to our webinar today. We have two great speakers for you who are experts in their field, but I'll start by saying how entertaining tonight's webinar is for us because Taryn, your group manager, if you're on, Taryn, you can say hi. Taryn is in Portland, Oregon right now. Rob is in Vermont. I am in London. And Brigid is in New Zealand. So this is, and may well be the only time, this is a 4-time zone presentation. So I'm excited by that. I will just say that Rob, in particular, and I don't mind saying, is one of my favorite medical device group members, and I'll tell you why. Because Rob, months ago, just started contributing to the group and selflessly answering questions, and I was compelled to seek him out. Who is this guy? And we became friendly. He now manages our QA-RA group, which is one of our subgroups with 2,400 members or so. And he's doing a fantastic job with it. So I asked him if he would treat our group to this webinar, and here he is. I'll leave him to introduce Brigid. I know we have a lot to cover in an hour. I will put myself on mute and interject as needed. Rob, take it away.
Thank you, Joe. Well, instead of starting out with the normals, I'm just going to start out with a story. Back in the fall of 2009, I joined BSI, and the first thing that they did was they sent me off for training on how to be a lead auditor. And that seemed a little strange to me since I was already a lead auditor and audit program manager at 3 different companies, and they were recruiting me because I was already a lead auditor and very good at this. So why do I have to go off to a course on this? So the first course they sent me off to was in Florida, and it was a nice sunny place, and the instructor presented a whole bunch of slides, and in that slide deck was the slide I'm showing you right now, without that little slogan at the top, without the chain on the left-hand side that I created. It was a BSI slide, and it illustrated why they call it a turtle diagram. It's because it has this oval in the middle, and it has 6 boxes around it. But I really didn't understand how that was going to help me audit. I had never heard of that. I only used audit checklists, and I used audit checklists to help all my auditors complete their audits on time and make sure that they didn't forget anything. It sort of was a crutch that helped them do their audits effectively and consistently. But BSI said I have to, and they told me I was going to be observed by another auditor, and they wanted to see me actually use these turtle diagrams. So I got a little nervous, and I started asking other BSI auditors, so how do I use these turtle diagrams? And some of them actually took the time to show me how to use them, and that was really helpful. Most of those that helped me had some previous automotive or aerospace experience where they use it all the time. It's actually a requirement. For some of those customers, they want you to actually fill these out, and the third-party auditor is the one that's supposed to do it. But then there were other auditors that worked for BSI that said, yeah, I don't do it all the time. So I wasn't sure whether these were worth my while learning or not, but I said, well, I really need to learn how to use these. And then BSI gave me the opportunity to teach a lead auditing course. So in January of 2010, they asked me to teach a lead auditing course, but not all by myself. It was my first time teaching it. I taught lots of auditing, but not a lead auditor course that was accredited by ANAP. So I was co-teaching it with one of their best instructors, and he taught turtle diagrams differently than everybody else that had explained turtle diagrams. And so that's what I'm going to try to show you in the next 7 slides, is what he showed me and why I now use turtle diagrams all the time, and I believe so strongly that is the way to do an audit, not these checklists. I don't even make checklists anymore unless somebody makes me. So if a client wants me to make a checklist, sure, I'll make you all the checklists you want. But if I don't have to, I use turtle diagrams. So the first step of making a turtle diagram is the shell. Step one, you interview the process owner. So you got to identify who the process owner is. You have to interview them. And the first question should be, could you please describe the process? It's an open-ended question. You're asking them to describe the process, simple step-by-step. Don't ask a checklist question. Make it really simple, conversational. Put the person to leave. Ask them to describe in layman's terms what they do every day. Step-by-step, what do you do? The next step, I like to identify what the process inputs are. And I say to them, tell me about the paperwork that tells you what to do next. Okay, so I gotta do something. In this case, it's receiving inspection. How do I know what to inspect? How do I know how to inspect it? That's step one, the inputs. So the incoming inspection person has purchase orders and purchasing info. So drawings, AQLs, these are the things that are inputs to the incoming inspection process. Next is the outputs. We ask the people, the process owner, what kind of paperwork do you create when you do incoming inspection? What is the paperwork that you complete as part of the process? So you fill out an inspection record, but then if you have something that's good, you do one thing with it. If you have something that's bad, you do something different with it. So you have either acceptance stickers that you put on the product and tell the warehouse, take it away, or you have non-conform material records and then it goes on to quarantine or hold or get some sort of reject status until you can do something with it. Step four, what equipment do you use? What facilities do you use? What materials do you use? This is where I ask the questions about the work environment, the software they use, and the gauges or measurement equipment they use. So a lot of times they have software that they use to enter the data, so you know it's been received. You have to enter in the ERP system, assign a receiver, print out a receiver. We now live in modern times when everything's computerized and we need to track our inventory, so that's one of the steps. You might also have one of the more advanced ERP systems where you actually enter the data from the actual measurements if you're inspecting something. You might have a Gauge R&R study. If you were one of the early participants here in today's webinar, you might have heard me mention Gauge R&R. That's one of the tools that we use to make sure that the measurement technique is actually valid, that we can actually consistently measure the product. And the last piece, probably the most obvious for incoming inspection, is your measurement device, does it actually have a sticker on it that tells you it's calibrated and over what range? The next step is who is going to be doing this inspection. So how do you decide who's going to be doing inspection? How are they assigned? Which people are qualified to do what types of product? If you have an optical product, you might not have all your inspectors qualified to do optical inspection. Maybe only some of them can. Maybe you have printed circuit boards. Maybe only some of them are qualified to inspect solder joints. You also want to look for training records. So you might have a follow-up trail identifying the names and the titles, and you're going to look for specific training on whatever procedures they were performing. Step 6, how do you do this? Most auditors that are using the checklist method, the first thing they tell you is get a copy of the procedure. That's one of the last things I do, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. But what I ask for here is what procedure do you use? What rev do you use? I write down the procedure number, the revision. I might look for external standards. So do they have the most current revision of the external standard referenced in that document? But the reason why I often ask this last, if not at all, is because it takes a lot of time to read a procedure. Part of the beauty of this method is that I don't have to read a procedure and write a checklist. Instead, I have to learn this 7-step process and ask questions and take notes. It's always the same. It's really simple. So what I do is I'll say, I know for the calibration of the calipers that they're using, what happens if they drop it on the ground? Well, now it might be out of tolerance. So what do they do with it? So I'll ask the person, in your calibration procedure, show me where it says what to do when you drop a caliper and it's out of tolerance. I'll ask them to show me that phrase. I know it's a requirement because I've been trained on the standard, but I don't have to read the standard and find it. Instead, I can ask them this question and have them show me. That demonstrates competency and familiarity with the procedure. If they can't, then I get a little concerned. If the person pulls out the procedure, prints it off the database, and walks me step by step through the procedure and says, step 1, it tells me to do this. Step 2, it tells me to do this. I know this is a coached interviewee, and I'm not going to get anything that isn't on the procedure. So I try a different line of questioning. Step 7, this is probably the most valuable place for me to find audit trails and for me to really add value during an audit. And this is where I identify metrics. And a lot of times my response that I get back from the interviewee is, well, we don't really track any. Manufacturing folks do. They have scrap and they have first pass yield, and they seem to be driven more about metrics than a lot of other departments. But many of the departments, particularly the more administrative functions, like design control, they might have 0 metrics. And this is usually where I find, okay, let's identify what processes aren't working in this design control process, and let's figure out, is there a way we can measure that? And we can suggest that is an improvement to that process. So that's one of the greatest places where you can find metrics or find opportunities for improvement to identify. The next thing that I want to do is go back to slide 1 or step 1 here and point out the clauses. So in the center of the blue oval here, we have clause 7.43. That's what clause I'm covering during this step of the interview. The next slide, I get 2 more clauses. The next slide, I have 3 more clauses. Every single slide has clauses that I'm covering. So instead of having an audit for every clause of the standard, instead, in one audit, if I really wanted to, I could probably audit every single clause of the standard in one process. So incoming inspection somehow touches all the support processes and all the management processes. So it's a very efficient way of covering all the standards, all the clauses of the standard. Okay. So now that you understand what a turtle diagram is, I have a challenge for you. If you really want to outperform checklists, if you want to go really fast and have great audits, I have a 3-step process for you. Very simple. Number 1, when we're done here, maybe not tonight, particularly if you're in Denmark, but tomorrow, sit down with the rest of the auditing team that you manage and watch this webinar again so everybody understands it the same way you do. Number 2, have everyone create their own turtle diagram. Just go around the room, have each person stand up at the whiteboard, have somebody else in the room pick a process randomly, and have the whole group generate a turtle diagram. And list as many subclauses as you can for each of the 7 parts of the turtle diagram to prove to yourself that you can cover almost the entire standard with a turtle diagram. And the last step is step 3, use them in the next audit. So the next time you do a real audit, every single person on your audit team, make them use the turtle diagram. Because the only way you're going to get good at this is to practice. That isn't the only method you can use, but try it to practice it once. Have everybody use the turtle diagram, and you'll see why checklists are fast, but turtle diagrams are so much faster, and you can win. You can really have your company be much more efficient and have a much more effective audit process. Okay, now to the other side of the planet. It's freezing cold here in Vermont, but Brigid is at, she lives in Maraetai, New Zealand, and this is a picture of Amana Beach. And she's going to explain to us how you can take a strategic approach to planning your audit program, the entire program, what things to consider. So take it from there, Brigid. And I'll give you control of the keyboard. Sorry about that.
Thanks, Rob.
Forget that.
So, I think we have control of the keyboard. Yes. Almost. Maybe you could flick to the next slide, Rob, just while that's handing over. So hello everyone. What you're going to see in a moment is a slide of my garden. There we are. And this is just outside my office here where I'm sitting. And often I come out here to my food garden to de-stress or when I need to think something through. So when Rob and I were having to think through this section of our webinar, I remembered back to the years when I was a quality manager, preparing internal audit program, preparing the supplier audit program. I remembered always feeling overloaded, grabbing last year's audit schedule and tweaking the spreadsheet a bit and saving the file as this year's audit program. I know why we do it this way. It gets the job done adequately. And then we have an audit program that delivers much the same job as it's always done, adequately. Same results, no more. So today I'm going to give you an approach to audit program planning that will give you results that are much more than adequate, that will give you a world-class audit program. Out here in the garden, thinking about this, I realised that planning an audit program is much like planning succession planting in this garden, which provides food for 12 months of the year for us. And clearly, to get that food for 12 months, we need to think very carefully about scheduling and about providing our food on a regular basis, planting things in time. In my early gardening years, I planted what my neighbours planted, and I planted in rows. A whole row of lettuces or radishes that all came on together. Well, what do you do with a row of radishes? I don't even like radishes. The neighbour's head when I approached with another basket of zucchinis. I could see them disappearing. But there were never enough tomatoes put up to last through the year, and there were big gaps where I had to buy vegetables through the year. And I struggled to stay on top of the gardening chores because they were like that. They felt like chores. And then there were the garden tragedies that occurred because I planted in the wrong season, so my lettuces were bitter or my beans didn't come up. Gradually I got better at this planning, but it was too slow. And the real breakthrough came after I incorporated the late great Stephen Covey's principles into other parts of my life. And I suddenly realised that these principles apply to my garden as well. I stood in the garden and I told myself, Brigid, begin with the end in mind. I needed to understand the outcomes that I was after before I could actually get what I needed in the garden. The outcomes of a regular flow of food, a garden that I felt good about, was a pleasure to work in, and that provided me with an energising haven. Once I had that end in mind, then I started seeing the skills that I needed and needed to hone, the techniques that I wanted, and I got better and better at making it happen that way. Rob, I might need you to click the slides on. Nothing is, there we are. So begin with the end in mind. Same principles applying to audit program planning. You need to be quite clear on what it is you need to have in your audit program before your mental filters, your resources will appear to you and you'll begin to make it happen that way. So what outcomes do you want from your audit program? Once you've got that clearly formed, detailed outcome, then you're going to be able to make that happen. I'm going to give you a set of questions in 3 groups to prompt you to fully describe your desired outcomes for the audit program. So Rob, are you clicking for me? I think we need to be clicking through to slide 17. Okay. So we're going to have going to cover these questions in 3 areas. The big picture, what are our criteria of auditing, and what are the soft factors? Clicking through, firstly we're going to look at the big picture. So firstly, clearly, what does your quality policy say and what do your quality objectives say? Now I said clearly, but it's surprising how often we forget to actually go to our quality policy and quality objectives, which should be driving everything that we do in our quality management system, including our audits. It's likely, or almost certainly, that your policy is going to say something about compliance, and obviously we're auditing for compliance. It should also say something maybe about improvement, and you may find other things in there that you want to bring into your audit program. Second question, what are the key processes to build an audit schedule around? It's not necessary to have separate audit processes for your support processes. And Rob's already talked about that, and we'll talk about that some more. I'm sure that after you've listened to him, you're fairly convinced that auditing around your processes is a good idea. Number 3, what change is your business plan flagging for this year? There could be a shift to a new production line, maybe a new market that you want to be selling into, which has different regulatory requirements that need to be reflected in your quality management system. Maybe there's going to be some downsizing that's going to have an effect on morale in the company that also could affect the timing of your audits, or a whole range of things that maybe wouldn't normally have been in your audit program. Number 4, what would top management like you to audit? Firstly, you might look at your management review minutes and your CAPAs, and I've assumed that you've already got some trending coming out of those that's going to be driving your audit program. But go talk to your CEO, talk to your senior manager, ask them. Is auditing for improvement important, or maybe it's minimisation of waste, or maybe there's some other thing that's very important to them that isn't showing elsewhere in what you've been looking at. You could be quite surprised. And number 5, what should be the range and scope of your audit program? Maybe you should be auditing other departments or other sites. Maybe the accounts department, which often doesn't make it into quality management system audits. But it's surprising where they do interface with the quality management system. Or maybe you've got a remote sales office, or there's a distributor you've had a few problems with. Maybe it would be worthwhile doing a remote audit of that distributor. And then the second set of questions, which are around the criteria, the audit criteria. So firstly, what regulations and standards? The obvious question. Beyond the basics of Part 820 and ISO 13485, what else should we be covering? Maybe the company's going into Japan and there are particular factory requirements which need to be considered. Maybe local regulations about hazardous materials or trade waste. Number 3. Sorry, number 2. Never mind. What regulations or standards have changed or are changing? For example, if you've got an EU certificate, the relevant annex of the harmonised version of ISO 14971, the European harmonised version, needs to be considered. Because that's explaining to us a different way of understanding how the Europeans are now interpreting ISO 14971. So your auditing should check that a gap analysis and an action plan has been adequately completed. Maybe there are other regulatory changes that are affecting your quality management system. Third question, do you have other management systems that could be audited together with your quality management system and integrated audits? Maybe those management systems, like your environmental management system, aren't actually integrated with your quality management system, but that doesn't mean you can't integrate the auditing of them and make life easier for everyone. And fourthly, what customer requirements should be included in the internal audit program? Have you looked at your customer quality agreements? Have they got particular requirements that need to be reflected and picked up in different parts of your process? Maybe there are quality requirements buried in contracts that you haven't actually seen. Maybe in the commercial contracts. Maybe in the last audit you had by a customer, they indicated something that isn't actually written down there, but nevertheless is fairly important in your program. And thirdly, the third group of questions are the soft factors. In our analytical, technical world of medical devices, we sometimes forget about these, and often we forget about them in our audit program planning. But these factors can make the difference between ongoing success of your program or just having that adequate program that we want to move past. So firstly, what have you seen working really well in the audit program? Maybe you could incorporate a bit more of that. Maybe you've got one auditor who's getting really good results. How are they doing that? Maybe they're already using turtle diagrams. Secondly, what learning outcomes could you achieve from audits for your auditees? And if you want to achieve learning outcomes for your auditees, what state of mind do you need them to be in? How do you need them to be feeling during that audit to be in the best state for learning? Some of us will remember Deming's 12th principle, drive out fear. If they're feeling really nervous and really fearful about how this audit's going to go, they're not going to be in the best space for learning. So how do your auditors need to be in order to drive that state in your auditees? And how do you as an audit program manager need to be to achieve that state in your auditors? So the third question then is, how do you want your auditors to feel about doing the audits? Do you want them to be thinking, well, this is just another chore that I need to do, I need to tick this off, or someone's going to shout at me, but I really haven't got time to this, so I'm just going to go out there and do it in a bit of a rush and feel a bit stressed about doing it? Or do you want them to be really feeling that they're going to get something out of this audit, to look forward to doing the audit, and to be reflecting that through to the auditees? And that relates to the fourth question then, of what learning outcomes can we achieve for auditors. Rob's going to talk a bit about adjacent link auditing in the next section, and that's a very good way of getting auditors to learn about their internal suppliers and their internal customers. But what other areas might auditors be interested in exploring or learning about? And what do you need them to know about? And the fifth question in here, how do you want your organisation to perceive the audit team and the audit program? What do you want to hear people saying about the audit program over the water cooler? What do you want to hear management saying? What's the conversation that you want to be having with your boss about the audit program? And how do you want to feel about the audit program when you hear people talking about it? How are those conversations going to impact on the resources that are available to you for the audit program? So a set of important questions there. There's a handout. I think we flicked through those slides. There's a handout available to you, and on the next slide, there we are. If you go to the Medical Device Academy website, you can download those after the webinar. So what outcomes do you want from your audit program? Think about that, and I hope that these questions will help you think about some other aspects of that. If you want to practice this approach, the activity in the training program that Rob and I are going to be running in April will give you an opportunity to practice on planning an audit and actually sitting down with other audit program managers and doing that. So what I want you to be doing is to create in your mind the equivalent of a garden that supplies the kitchen as a great place to hang out. No rows of radishes or zucchinis you can't give away. Begin with the end in mind. So moving through, you can prepare an adequate audit program that's a variant of last year's schedule and gives you much the same results, or you can take a step further and use your audit program to deliver better results each year for your department, your auditors, your auditees, and your organisation. So there's the challenge for you. Now, there's a photo to look at, isn't there? I've realised that most suppliers from the Northern Hemisphere come to New Zealand to audit their customers about this time of year. And who can blame them when you look at that photo of Rob's place? You see that snowdrift there? That's actually higher than his car. So Rob's now going to talk to you about how to plan your audits to your processes, not to the calendar. He's going to talk about a supplier audit, but this applies equally well to internal audits. So over to you, Rob.
This is Joe. Brigid, will you be back on later to tell us how to get a vacation home over at your place?
Yeah, well, I could if you wanted to. I'm sure that could come up in question time, Joe.
Yeah, it may well. Yeah, I like the picture of your place better than the picture of Rob's place. Back on mute I go. Thank you.
Okay.
Rob, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me? Hello? I think you can hear me.
Rob? I'm sure everyone else can hear you as well.
For this particular program, Brigid was talking about a concept that she and I came up with called adjacent link auditing. And this chain over the left-hand side of the screen is the image that we came up with to illustrate that. But before I can go into detail about what the adjacent link auditing process is, the first thing you have to do before you plan any audit program is to understand the process. And so this diagram here, this process interaction diagram, is one of the classic forms of demonstrating processes and how they interact in your organization. And in this particular case, I've color-coded them to match our chain. The red processes are support processes or management processes. These are the things that make everything coordinated and help with interactions. But the core processes are the things that actually deliver a product to your customer. And so those are the blue ones. Those are the most important piece. But you need both the blue and the red working together. So we call the blue links adjacent links. So these are the major steps of the process, and the red links are the adjoining links. That's the communication of information and transport of material between departments. So those are new definitions that she and I came up with, and she coined the term adjacent link auditing, and I did the handiwork with the diagrams. I think she came up with the more valuable part. So I was always using the term upstream and downstream because I'm a process engineer, I'm a chemical engineer, so I think of what's upstream and what's downstream. But when you're in the middle of the process, you think of what's next to you. So you're one of these blue links, and you're thinking about the departments that are on either side of you. The red links are the communication between your two departments. And when we're doing a process audit, one of the key things we focus on is the red links. How effective are those red links? Because it does you no good to purchase something if you don't tell receiving inspection that it's coming. And it does you no good at receiving inspection to reject something and not tell purchasing, because then it goes in the non-conforming material cage and you can't make anything. They need to know that that stuff was bad so they can reorder more stuff and get the problem fixed. Then, after we had come up with the concept of blue and the red links, we said, what if we go back to the turtle diagram and we use the blue and the red links there? So here is a fusion of the two concepts. You have your turtle diagram and you have your adjacent link auditing concepts merged together in this diagram. So it's not just the simple chain on the left-hand side, it's something much more complex. And this explains why it's so hard to write a good process interaction diagram, because you've got at least 6 different inflows and outflows of information and materials from every single department. And that's if we just use these 6 parts to the turtle diagram, and I'm sure you can come up with more. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to explain how you can apply this to your own audit program. So the example I'm going to use here is for supplier audit. A lot of times people are just talking about internal audits where you might have the luxury of looking at one department at a time. But if you're going to go visit a supplier, particularly in New Zealand, you're not going to audit just one process. You're going to audit everything you can get your hands on in that one visit. So last year's hypothetical audit was performed by me. And Bill Bryson, he was a great host. He was a funny guy. But, you know, this was the audit that we did last year. We covered I think we got 8, 9, maybe 10 different clauses here that we've covered. We didn't have the time to cover calibration. We didn't have the time to cover dock control. We didn't have time to cover training. I might have sampled a couple of training records, but I really didn't have time. I focused on just these clauses and the checklist that I developed for each of those processes. And I called this a process audit because I'm auditing processes after all. And it was a 2-day audit. I flew in the night before. I did the audit, went home to the hotel, my home away from home, and then I did the audit the second day, and I got out of Dodge at around 4 o'clock to catch my flight home, which was a red-eye. Well, this year we were supposed to have our audit in Iowa in May, when it's a little nicer weather, auditing around the calendar, of course, but we're having some problems with the supplier right now. And one of our biggest problems is rejects that they want to rework. So the engineer that's responsible for reviewing and signing off on the rework plans is saying, I'm not signing off on any more of these until I actually physically go out there. So everything in manufacturing is going to come to a grinding halt real fast here if I don't get out there. So he identified that's the most critical thing, and that's our last one down there on that list, non-conforming materials and rework. While we were asking the other people in the department, well, if we're going to go out there early, what else should we look at? The incoming inspection person said, every single time I get their orders in, they make a box for us, and it has all the computer controls in and the software, and then we integrate it with the rest of the system. But they get the packaging. Sometimes it's cut corner protector, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's scratched, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's got a certificate of analysis, sometimes it has a device history record, sometimes it doesn't. So every single time I get it differently, they can't seem to package it the same way twice. That's a problem. It's preventing me from transferring stuff to manufacturing, and I have to expedite everything. Product realization planning. The purchasing person, our buyer, is always saying, you know, I asked for 20, they sent 10. I asked for 20, they sent 15. I asked for 20, they sent 30. So they never send the same amount. They're always sending a little more or a little less, and they're always sending it a little earlier or a little late. And it's making it impossible for us to keep track of orders. So that's one of our concerns. And then the last piece, the piece that we always focus on, it's inspection and test and release. So when we go there, that we always focus on that because it's one of the most critical steps. But these other three right now we're also having trouble with. So strategically, as a company, we've decided we're not going to do a one-person audit this time around. We're not going to do a normal audit. We're going to do a more in-depth for-cause audit of the supplier this time. We're going to send out a 4-person team, and because the cost of getting to Manchester, Iowa is so high, because it's out in the middle of nowhere, an hour from Dubuque, which is also in the middle of nowhere, we really need to send the whole team out there. And we looked at the cost of commercial flights, and then we looked at private charters, and we can private charter a jet to get us to Dubuque, the whole team, cheaper than we can get to any other nearby city that's substantial in size and then drive. So we decided we're all chartering a jet, we're going to fly to Dubuque, and then when we get to Dubuque, then we're going to drive 1 hour to Manchester, Iowa, and we're going to audit the supplier and get it over with all in one day. And then we can have dinner in Dubuque, and then fly home at our leisure instead of taking a red-eye and going through 3 more cities. So that's what we're going to do. Well, before we come up with that plan, we need to decide what things are upstream, what things are downstream, and who should do the audits. And, of course, the 3 people that had issues are the 3 people that pop up. They're upstream or downstream. So this little table here, where you identify the processes that you want to audit, the critical ones, when you go to audit a supplier, identify who's upstream and who's downstream, and pick one of them. Don't pick just whoever's available. Pick somebody that has a vested interest, that's adjacent to the process and understands the inflows and outflows of materials and information, because they're in the best position to inspect those links. So here's the schedule we came up with. And one of the things you'll notice is it's a 1-day audit. Number 2, you'll notice that we spend 2.5 hours auditing each area instead of an hour. Another thing you'll notice is that we audit tons of different clauses in each audit, because we're now using turtle diagrams in the process approach, and we're able to cover all these different clauses in each process. So what we had before, I go back a couple of slides here. We had a 2-day audit. We had very short duration in each process, and we didn't cover those support processes. Now we have longer audits in each area. We get it done in 1 day instead of 2. We cover many more clauses, all the support clauses that we can, and we're really diving deep in each of these critical processes. So this is a much more effective audit. Now, it costs us more people, but these were all people that had a vested interest. It wasn't a task that they didn't want to do. It was a task they knew they needed to do to get this supplier back on track. That's it. So before we get into this, Brigid's website, which is brand new and up and running, I forgot to include that in the slide deck, so I've included that here. And also, if you go to her website, there's a link for the video. So if it was annoying to you that I wasn't clicking at the right time through that middle section, you can see how it was supposed to be on her video. Over to Joe.
Over to Joe, who has just unmuted himself. Well, thank you both. And as I joked in the comments section as you were fumbling about, I said in the beginning of the presentation, absolutely look to Rob for auditing help, but do not ask him for GoToWebinar help. So on behalf of your entire technical team, we apologize for that. Michael has written us with a question. Did you need to certify the other team members as auditors? Who will take that?
I think that's one for Rob.
The audit team would definitely need to be qualified auditors. So I always recommend that you want to have a small number of people that are trained to be auditors. And second of all, you want to make sure that they're a cross-functional team. You want the small number of people so they can get good at it. You want them to do lots of audits, not 1 or 2 a year. And you want the cross-functional team so you can do what I showed in that diagram, the upstream, the downstream, that table that we had. You want to have people that are upstream or downstream, not just somebody that knows how to audit, because they'll do a more effective job of the audit. So when you're looking for auditors, don't just look in your QA department. You need to look in other departments, and they need to understand these concepts, and they need to really invest the time and energy to learn how to do it. My example was a fictional example, but whenever I have managed an audit program, I have never asked for more than one person from my QA department to do audits, because I really don't want this to be a QA activity. I really want the involvement of the other departments. And you have to make your senior management understand that and understand why. That's why this webinar was created. It's to show them.
Well, some lovely questions and comments are coming in while you speak. As I read the next one, Rob, if you wouldn't mind, please advance the slide, because I think you had something else to share there. Thank you, Doug. Doug writes, very interesting. I plan to adopt these techniques and conventions for internal audit this spring. I will add that Rob and Brigid, who are probably too shy to self-promote, that on the screen now you'll see that they are doing a 2-day class in 3 different cities, which will likely sell out. It has not yet. So if they have whet your appetite, Doug and others, and you feel that you could benefit from this course, we encourage you to do that. And they have early bird pricing through, what is that, Monday? So thank you, Doug. Let's see. Jennifer writes, what are your thoughts on the biomedical auditor certification through ASQ? Thank you, Jennifer.
Rob.
We'll take that.
I guess I'm taking that one as well. For the biomedical auditor certification program, I haven't personally gone through that program. I went through BSI's ANAB accredited course on how to audit. It was 9001 with emphasis on 1345. I think that I can say without exception, no matter what system you go through, they're going to teach you the basics that are in 19011. That's ISO 19011. That's a standard that tells you what you're supposed to do as an auditor. They're also going to teach you about a standard. So biomedical, it's going to be 1345. They may even teach you about some regulations. But that's not a substitute for auditing experience and practice. That's what you need is practice to really be an effective auditor. I hope that answers your question.
Jennifer, if it did, go ahead and leave us a comment so we can see that we adequately answered for you. Kimberly asks, can the lead auditor train the team members, or do they need outside training?
I'm sure that Rob and I both have an opinion on this. I've often seen the expectation from outside auditors that the internal auditors have had outside training. My personal view is that if you're training well, inside training is adequate. And Rob's got a series of blogs around training your auditor, which go into that in quite some detail around this kind of process. But outside training is always good because they come in with different ideas. Rob?
Rob, is your website 13485 CERT?
Yes, my website's originally
CERT.com.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was
I
originally
just sent that
intended.
to, oops, no.
Sorry.
I sent it to myself. Charming. I'm going to send that out to the group so they can easily click through to it. I'm sorry. Go on.
Originally, it was designed to help companies obtain or achieve ISO 1345 certification. But along the way, it's become helping a lot of companies learn how to audit themselves, because one of the things you have to do is you have to perform a full quality system audit before you're allowed to get certified. And they want to see evidence of that. Another thing is, before the webinar even started, we had somebody email a question that I thought was particularly good, and I think Brigid has that, and she's going to read that for us.
I do. That's a question from Diane, and the question is, when hiring an external auditor, what questions can you ask during the interview process in order to weed out the auditors who don't want to go deep enough? I've seen auditors go through the motions during audits, and I doubt they've understood enough about internal procedures to recognise even surface problems, much less systemic issues not yet at the surface. Is there a review board of sorts for the seasoned auditors to make selection easier? So there's actually three questions in there, really. What's a good question for the interview process to get a consultant to act as an internal auditor for you? Is there a review board that makes that easier? And how do you know if they're really going to go deep enough? So, Rob.
Thank you, Brigid. I did a little bit of homework on Diane, and Diane doesn't work for a company making bandages. As you might have guessed, she has some unique product that really has challenging needs. They have a high-risk device. So they need auditors that really do a great job, because they can't afford to be releasing products that aren't safe and aren't effective. So that's part of her need. So she wants a really good audit, not one that just meets the requirements, but a really strong auditor. And so the answer to the first question, what questions should you ask them? Well, I think that probably the best question that you can ask any auditor is, how many audits have you done? When I want somebody to do an FDA mock inspection, that's the question I ask, is how many FDA inspections have you hosted? How many times have you seen the real FDA walk in your door? How many times have you actually conducted a mock FDA inspection? If you want somebody to be an auditor and they've only done 20 audits, that's a far cry from 200. And when you start getting up approaching 1,000 audits, like Brigid and I, and you've completely lost track of how many audits you've done, now you are a great auditor. But even then, that's not necessarily proof, because you can still not show that much interest in the product. There is no source I know of out there other than auditor certification, like the earlier question about the biomedical auditor certification. That's the only thing I can point to as a qualifier for auditors. But I know a lot of auditors that don't have it that are great auditors, and I know a lot of auditors that do have it that are not so great. So really, what is a much more useful tool, you're asking a question about how deep will this auditor go before I hire them. So you got to give them a test. Give them a practical exam. And the test I'd like to do is give them a CAPA that you've already completed, but take some important information out of the CAPA. Give them the CAPA before all the answers were in there. Take out a key part of the root cause and let them see if they can identify that you didn't go deep enough in your 5 why analysis to really identify what the most likely root cause here is. And if you take that critical piece of information out and see if they ask the right questions in the interview process to get to the right root cause, the true root cause, now you've got a good auditor, because that's what an auditor needs to do. They need to keep on digging, following the audit trail until they get to the right answer, rather than just saying, I checked the box.
Yep.
Get some more questions, Shaw?
And just, Rob, did you talk there about references, actually getting references from other clients of that consultant to just talk to other people who have actually seen this person auditing?
Excellent idea.
Well, you made Diane happy. She really likes that idea. Thanks, Rob. Michael asks, audit plans 1345 centric. Do you meld QSR into these?
Absolutely. Yes. And if you didn't hear, Brigid said yes as well.
Michael, you're welcome to type in more if there's more to your question, but it seems pretty unanimous on that. Michelle, oh, I'm sorry, go on.
Yeah, when I actually write the audit plans, the audit agenda will typically only have one or the other, and I ask the client, which one do you want me to put in the audit agenda? Kind of depends on who's looking at it. But a lot of times they're worried about the ISO auditor that's going to be looking at their audit records, whereas the FDA is not technically supposed to look at the audit records. So that's why we reference usually the ISO clauses. But I always try to keep in mind the differences between the two, so if there's a unique requirement of the QSR, I try to make sure that they have that there as well. So even though ISO 1345 doesn't require a training procedure, they need to have one. Even though it doesn't say you have to have a DHF, you have to have a technical file for CE marking, but they need a DMR. They need to know what a DMR is. They need to know what a DHF is. If they don't know what those buzzwords are or those acronyms are, they're into a world of hurt the next time the FDA comes through.
A world of hurt.
Yeah, I could maybe add to that as well. When I'm flicking through our bookshelf and not finding what, here we are, found the document I'm looking for. When 13485 came out, there was a document that was available on the GHD website, which is a correspondence between 13485 and the QSR. And it went through clause by clause. So I always keep a table of that handy, of that clause by clause comparison between them. So that makes it very easy to just flick between the standards when you're wanting to check. But always do them in the same audit.
You can find that same table in the AAMI compendium if you happen to have taken an AMI course recently.
Just to make sure we keep to an hour. Anna, yes, you will get a copy of the PowerPoint slides. After this, we have recorded this session. We will be putting it up on YouTube, and you will have ability to get the slides, and we're also having it transcribed. So all this good stuff is coming your way. For housekeeping, if anyone on the line has a question, please ask it in the next minute or two, because we're going to close the question box. We seem to have enough here to take us well to the top of the hour. So with no further ado, Michelle says thank you. You're welcome, Michelle. Terry says, if you are auditing for both ISO 13485 and 21 CFR 820, do you try to list both clauses and sections together?
I'll do that sometimes in an audit plan, just in separate parallel columns in the way that I described earlier. Again, it depends on what you're trying to prove, but for myself, I like to do that to make sure that I've covered it. So I agree with Rob, I don't like doing checklists, but I do like to check off that I have covered the entirety of the standard. There's no requirement to cover the entirety of the standards and the regs through a year, but I still like to give myself confidence. So I want to make sure. So I like to do that in some way, shape or form. And the other way that I'll do that is in a table linked to my audit program schedule. Again, if you look at our websites and go to our blogs, Rob and I have written a couple of blogs around this. The one on mine directly references Rob's, and they tie together. So you'll see an example of a spreadsheet there.
In the chat box, Rob and Brigid, go ahead please and share your email addresses, because I'm already seeing we're going to probably run out of time. But we'll go ahead and take these questions from Kevin, Jerry, and Deb. We'll close it there, and then my friends Rob and Brigid will be available offline. There's Rob's and Brigid's to come. Kevin asks, how far would you go with auditing the materials on the company website, especially for medical devices?
Can you repeat that one? Can you repeat that, Joe?
I will. How far would you go with auditing the materials on the company website, especially for medical devices?
I was getting caught up on the concept of materials, and I realized the question is about the advertising and promotional content of websites for medical device companies.
That's how I interpret Kevin's comment as well. Kevin, you can clarify if you like.
That's something that I find a lot of companies get in trouble with the FDA because they're making a claim on their website that is not approved by the FDA or not cleared by the FDA. It's making a claim they're not allowed to make. They don't have evidence for it, or it's exceeding the 510K terms. I have experienced that one other time with a notified body, but it's rare for notified bodies, though it might change in the future. So the solution, the cap that almost always gets written, is regulatory will be part of the approval process of website changes. And every single marketing person on the planet hates that. They even call us the anti-sales group. However, if you think about it, both of us have clinical data. The marketing people are trying to show how the product is totally different from everything else on the market. And the regulatory people are trying to show how it's totally the same as everything else on the market through the 510K process. We both have the same data. We're both spin doctors. But you really need to make sure that you have a review by both sides. And instead of the regulatory person saying no all the time, what they need to do is say, you can't say that, but I think this is what you're trying to do, and this is how we need to go about doing it. So don't just say no, give them a solution.
Yeah, Rob, I totally concur.
Let's keep your answer there so we can get to Jerry's question. You broke up there, Brigid. I'm going to take that opportunity to ask Jerry's question. Is it the auditor's responsibility to identify root cause? I thought it was imperative for the auditees to identify root cause.
It's not. It is for the auditees to find root cause, but a good auditor will usually be burrowing down, because if they'll be looking for root cause, and they're going to do it instinctively, which comes back to Diane's question about how deep do they go, because they want to find the root cause, because that's going to lead them to other issues. But yes, it's up to the auditee, or whoever is going to be dealing with the corrective action, to actually investigate, analyze, and then come up with a corrective action.
One of the things that I've found many times is that if I can give the auditee the right metric to go back and look at closely and do statistical analysis of, that will help them in their investigation of root cause. So I usually try to get to the right metric or metrics to help them find the problem, but I usually don't have time to go any further.
In the interest of time, I'll continue. I am going to send in the chat box, so you have their email addresses. That's a live link to their site, medicaldeviceacademy.com. So I'd ask if you would take a moment to click through to make sure that link works for you, so you can see the course that they're offering in April. Deb asks, can you share the cross-reference table?
I'm sure we could.
I'm sure you could. Is there a link for it, or do we want to send it out as an email?
The particular document that I was talking about, the Ed Kimmel document, I'd be quite happy to send that out as an email. So I could maybe send that to you, Joe.
Yes, and I can send it out to everybody. And, okay, let's squeeze in this last one. Radha asks, is it essential to audit your supplier if they are certified to 13485?
It depends on the risk. It depends entirely on the risk. If you have a supplier that you can verify the conformity of their product when it comes in the door quite easily, and they don't have a really high-risk component, you probably don't need to audit them. But if they're doing contract sterilization, you want to have that process validated. So you want to be involved in that process. If you want to have somebody do heat treating for you, you want to make sure that they're not mixing up materials and they've got tight controls over that heat treating process. So it all depends on, is it something I can easily verify myself, or it's something that I have to take on faith. If I have to take it on faith, I'm going to audit them. And it's all about risk. How risky is that component they're making?
Everything in medical device quality management systems is about risk.
We had said that that was going to be the last question. I wanted to close with one last thing for people. We've covered a lot of material in 1 hour, but the best way to master these concepts is practice. And that's why at the end of the turtle diagrams I said, this is what you need to do next. Well, if you want to learn all these concepts that we've had in this course and others, that's why we created a 2-day course. But we're not going to do it with webinars. We're not going to do it with GoToMeeting, and we're not going to do it with PowerPoint slides. Instead, we have 6 modules that we created. Each one's 1 hour and 15 minutes. It's going to be 30 minutes of presenting a new concept without slides, giving stories that are engaging you'll remember forever. And then we're going to cover 45 minutes of an activity and role-playing with your peers, other audit program managers, and you are going to learn so much from that role-playing and that activity that you won't ever forget it. And now you've had a chance to practice it before you have to go implement it. And that's how you'll really remember this material. It's by practicing it. So one last thing, you might even want to consider inviting your suppliers. If they have a really poor internal audit system, invite them to go to the course with you. It's a bonding opportunity for the both of you. And now they'll learn how to do their internal audits better, so you don't have to do so much auditing of them.
Rob, what are the 3 cities for their benefit?
The first one's in San Diego. That's April 11th and 12th. That one's going to be gorgeous. It's right on the water. We're at a Homewood Suites. We're going to actually have lunch out on the veranda, so gorgeous. The second facility is right next to the airport in Orlando. That's going to be the 15th and 16th. That's a Monday. That's at the Embassy Suites in Orlando. And then the third one is going to be Las Vegas. And I have a feeling because it's Las Vegas, I think that one will be the one that will fill up first. So if you want Las Vegas, sign up now. I know a few people want to stay later, and the hotels are honoring the pricing that we negotiated for 3 days before and 3 days after. So if anybody wants to make a weekend trip out of it, that's a great way to do it. I know of at least one of the attendees that's already thinking about that. So I highly recommend the sunny places. It's not Vermont. And we got really nice hotels. There are Embassy Suites for Orlando and in Las Vegas, Homewood Suites in San Diego. and all really nice and very close to the airport.
Well, you know, I've done a couple of these webinars now, and I think pound for pound, this is the most compliments, thank yous, well done, good presenters that I've ever read in the question box. So well done, you guys. There are a few questions left over. You'll be able to see them. Rob and Brigid, I'll make sure you get them so you can follow up directly with folks. And I will conclude by saying this is Joe Hage, the leader of the Medical Devices Group. Thank you for joining us this afternoon or evening, depending on where you are, morning for Singapore. And Rob and Brigid, you did a great job. I really appreciate you sharing this great content with the group for free. Thank you all very much, and I'll see you online. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.